Hi, this is Bruce Fredericks. Welcome to another in a series of interviews I conducted with rock musicians back in the 70s and 80s, while a journalist for The Island Ear, an entertainment magazine of Long Island and Queens. This time, I'm very pleased to bring you part one of my two-part interview with famed pop duo Hall Oates. It took place in the winter of 1981, soon after the release of Voices, the group's 11th record album, which spawned 4 top 40 singles, including How Does It Feel to Be Back?, a cover of the Righteous Brothers' You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', You Make My Dreams Come True, and Kiss on My List, which was Hall & Oates' first top 10 single since Rich Girl in 1977. Part 1 covers my chat with Daryl Hall. During our chat, Daryl spoke about his collaboration with John Oates, the album Voices, Daryl's relationship with Janna Allen, the inspiration for Sarah Smile, Hall & Oates' musical roots, even Daryl and John's heroic foiling of an armed robbery while the band was on tour in Australia. Here now, my conversation with Daryl Hall.
Did you have a special feeling when you recorded Voices that maybe, this one is going to be it, this is the one that's going to put us on top?
Yeah, we did have a feeling about it. We had a feeling that we had finally gotten control of what we were trying to control for a long time. And that really came about through producing it ourselves. Usually when we go into do an album, there's this kind of a tension that goes down because we're doing it with, we usually do it with, or in the past anyway, we did it with studio musicians and a producer, and usually, and quite a few times it involved going to California and all that kind of stuff. And it made it an event, kind of an uptight event, if you will. You know, it was kind of weird. I never felt really comfortable about going in, but at this time we just kind of slid into it. We wrote the songs. When we were ready, we did the recording at Electric Lady, which is about a block and a half from my house, and the Hit Factory uptown. And we did it with our band that we'd been working with for a while, so it was all very natural. And like I said, we produced it ourselves, so we just went in with an engineer. There was kind of that kind of confidence. There was no point where we really felt like, okay, now we're on the spot now. We have to produce now, that kind of thing. So it made the feeling in the studio much more relaxed and natural, and I think that's what transferred immediately. We could tell it transferred immediately to the record.
I believe it was War Babies. You worked with Todd Rundgren.
Yeah.
And he's one incredible producer, but there must be so much pressure working with somebody like that.
Well, our whole career has been a succession of fighting with producers. I mean, people say, we change our sound all the time. We do change our sound, but we don't change us. It's the producer that changes us. And we've had a succession of producers over the years, each one of whom had their own idea of what it was that they wanted Hall & Oates to sound like, and none of them sounded the way we wanted them to sound. So that was another thing. We felt that we had the control and was going to finally sound the way we always wanted it to. And I think that came across. And I think from now on, because we're going to keep producing ourselves, I think there's going to be a lot more continuity in what we do to the outside, because the songs have always been the same. We really haven't changed our writing style that much over the years. It's just in the way it's been produced.
The only departure, I would say Ecstatic, if I was to lump all the albums together and then separate one of them, Ecstatic seems to stand out. It seems to be a departure from what you had been doing. And again, is this attributed to a producer's liberty?
I think so. I think it had to do more with the production than anything. I don't think, if you take any one of those individual songs, I think you could trace any one of them back to other previous songs.
What was the idea on Ecstatic? What was the producer trying to do? It seemed like
David Foster heard us a certain way. I don't know. It's hard for me to describe what it is. It has to do with his experiences and the way he likes music to sound and things like that. I mean, you can kind of tell who he produces. He produced everything from Alice Cooper, Earth, Wind and Fire, and people like that. And it's not really where we're coming from. Either one. It's a very California-oriented mentality as opposed to an East Coast thing, which is what, obviously what we're into. And also we were up against all these people at the time who were yelling at us or not yelling at us, but yelling at each other about this rock, new wave versus disco and all that crap that was going down in 78 and 79. And we were trying to make some sort of a statement that encompassed all of what we wanted to say. And our producer took it the way other people did and tried to, instead of melt things together into what it is that we do. He made the same kind of distinction and separation between our different kinds of songs as the whole world was doing at the time. This kind of disco versus new wave stuff. Whereas we felt that where our music lay was somewhere in between that and apart from all that, or at least on that album. I think that there was definitely a schism on that album that was the whole idea that we were trying to avoid.
It's kind of neat, though. I like the lyrics that John wrote to Bebop Drop.
Yeah.
It's a parody on the whole thing because, all you want to do is just relax.
Exactly.
I want to do what I want to do, and all you want to do is get up there and dance.
Exactly.
You also used this instrument on that album called a holophone.
Yeah.
What exactly is a holophone?
Well, it's really, I just took the 24-track board and I made 4 of my voice on each note through overdubbing, chromatically up from a certain note up to another note, singing just a syllable ah, and it was an 8-second syllable, and an 8-second note, and then I transferred that to an hour-long tape so I wouldn't have a loop to deal with. I mean, this is all very technical. But anyway, what the result is, if you throw up, say, 1, 3, and 5 pot on the board, say pot 1, or track 1, track 3, track 5, you'll get 3 different notes of me singing ah in harmony. So in other words, I can harmonize with myself. So by moving the different tracks in and out, I can build different chords, and then through other techniques, I can slow it down, speed it up, do all kinds of things like that.
Well, you know what that reminds me of? It's something that was done on Fripp's first album, Exposure, when I'm trying to, I think it was the beginning, one of the sides, when you go ah.
Well, that was me.
That was something.
That was the holophone.
That was the holophone.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it also reminded me, in other words, you could have done the holophone way, or you could have done the Frippatronics way.
Yeah, well, it's just it's a different sound, that's all. But yeah, that's the first time I used it was on Exposure album.
That's interesting. I was reading before in an interview you were talking about the departure from one side to the other, the balance between idealism and practicalism and, sort of a realism. You seem to get very philosophical about it. This was in the Island Ear interview, which was done on you, on your solo projects,
right.
Talking about with Fripp. I talked with Robert Fripp at one time, and I know he can sit with you for hours and talk about his views towards the 1980s. What type of influence did you have upon one another when it comes to things like that?
Well, we've been friends for a long time, so we already talked in our beginning stages about, in kind of a formal way of kind of sounding each other out about our different views on things. And so we over the years we got past that. So we really just talk technically now. We just, I don't know how to put it. It isn't a very formal relationship. It's a very informal relationship I have with him. And then we just kind of talk and say, well, what do you want to do now? There's no real heavy thought, at least on the outside, that goes into it. The influences I think we have on each other is that I kind of ground him in some cases. Not grounding is the wrong word. He can be very stubborn and very idealistic about certain things that you don't necessarily have to be idealistic about. No, there's a time and a place for everything, and I think I have the ability to get him to be real occasionally, within himself more than anything. I can tell him that he's full of shit, and nobody else can.
It's tough to say it because he seems to be so convinced.
Yeah, I know.
About his drive towards 1981 that it is the answer, that it's the ultimate.
Yeah. Well, one thing that nobody really knows, or very few people know, is Robert's a lot different in his private persona than he is in his public persona. So he's one of those people. Some people present a different face to the world for various reasons, and I'm the opposite of him. I'm pretty much exactly the same as I am to the public. I don't change much because I like that idea. John and me are both very honest people, and I think that our show and our music and everything is very honestly conceived, and we pull it off that way. There's really not too much pretense in our music.
Looking at you and John together, you certainly are one of the more dynamic duos that have survived. In the beginning, there were duos like Seals and Croft, and they seem to have fallen by the wayside.
Well, I never looked at us as that kind of a duo. To me, that stuff came out of a very, a different tradition than we come out of. John and I come out of we're a duo because we're a songwriting team, and that goes way back before. That's more like Lennon and McCartney or any Jagger and Richards and people. Every band has two people that usually write the songs. That's a tradition that goes back even before rock and roll. Rodgers and Hammerstein and stuff like that. I don't know. I see us more as a writing duo like that, and then kind of that mellow Roggins and Messina, Seals and Croft, those kind of people, which is another tradition. It's more like a folk tradition that we're not really part of.
Well, John did have some roots into folk at one time.
Well, his roots in folk were minimal, and they came from a very urban end. It was, I don't know, he used to play around with traditional blues and traditional bluegrass, but he was never much of a folkie. I wouldn't call John a folkie. John was in an R&B band when he was in high school. He wasn't in a folk group. You know, he used to plunk around and go to the Philadelphia Folk Festival and all that stuff, but everybody in Philly did that. That was part of it. That was just part of an expansion. I don't really ever think of his roots as being particularly folky, you know, like, I mean, more from a traditional sense, more learning the blues and learning how to play slide guitar and stuff like that.
Okay, so there you are in Philadelphia, like you're saying. I see accounts of back then as sort of frustrating times for being able to get what you had on paper out into music. You can elaborate on it, what it was like in the early days, bringing it up to New York.
Well, it didn't last very long because we moved to New York almost as soon as we started together. When I think of Philadelphia, I think more of before John. I think of my not solo, but my studio work with Gamble and Huff and the things that I did in other groups, and kind of that working in the 60s, late 60s, in the Philadelphia soul bands and all that kind of stuff. When John and I got together, it was more as a performing duo, and because I wanted to break out of the studio and perform for people. So we kicked around for a few months in Philadelphia, and then until we finally got a record deal, which well, I don't know. I guess we spent about a year putting an act together in Philly, so I guess it was a while. But as soon as we had any success at all and got the record deal, we moved immediately to New York. It was the only time we ever played in Philly was we played like really small places. We played coffee houses and any place that had like 100 to 200 people, that kind of stuff. Art gallery openings, any place that would take us, basically.
Do you miss Philly?
No, I don't miss anything about Philadelphia. I never liked Philadelphia very much. No, it's not one of my favorite towns in the world. It's the biggest small town in the world. No, I'm not a confirmed Philadelphian, but no, I don't know. I never liked it that much there. We didn't grow up in Philadelphia. John and me grew up outside of Philly. I grew up in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, which is very little like Philadelphia. Yeah, you know, and I moved into Philadelphia to go to school and spent some time there and got into the whole thing there with the soul people, but then as soon as I could, I got out because I don't know. It's a very restricting place. I'd rather be from Cincinnati or Cleveland or somewhere in Philadelphia.
Oh boy!
I mean, really, it's a better.
Putting it low.
Well, I mean, you know, I hate to say it, but Philly's not my idea of a very urban place. It's got a lot of colonial tradition, and that's about it. The modern world hasn't really done too much to Philadelphia. I just don't have any. I haven't been there for years. Because my parents still live in Pottstown, so I don't even go to Philadelphia. I haven't been to Philly in about 6 years, except to play, and then I leave the same night because it's so close to New York. I just go home. So I have absolutely no contact with it at all. And John's the same way.
I see. It was very funny you mentioned this about Philly. One of our writers, Larry Kleinman, who you might remember from LIR, who's the music director, he's always putting down Philadelphia. And it just so happens he's got a job at the Philadelphia radio station now. He's eating crow.
Too bad for him. I mean, you want to know a perfect example of the Philadelphia mentality. They have one of the most beautiful art museums in the world there. And they've just recently put up a statue on the steps of the art museum of Sly Stallone doing his Rocky imitation. Now, that's on the steps of the art museum, and, you know, amid all the masterpieces. So that's a real insight into the mind of Philadelphia.
Tracy.
They should put a giant cheesesteak on the steps, too, you know?
Philadelphia cheesesteak,
yeah.
Of course. All right, let me see if I can get back on the track here somewhere. I want to go over a few of your songs. They're rather timely. Just stepping back to Ecstatic for a second. Who Said the World Was Fair?
Mm-hmm.
Came out about the time of the gas lines.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it was written before.
Yeah.
You actually knew about that. That's pretty perceptive. Now, all of a sudden, we have United States. The timeliness of those two songs is a little frightening.
Yeah, I guess it is. Thing is that there's so much in the world that goes down that's applicable to these things. That's part of the way we write. We usually take, like United States, what we decide to do with that. What that song's really about is John and I making a decision, a conscious decision at a certain point, to become citizens of the world. Now that sounds stupid, but as opposed to trying just to make it in America and be big rock and roll stars in America, we suddenly started viewing America as just another country that we can make money and play in. And for the past year, or longer actually. We've been actually doing a lot of dates outside of the States. We've done 2 world tours this year, which encompasses the Far East as well as the continent and England and everything. And we're going to be doing even more of that. In fact, we're going back in June to do another world tour. So we're doing a lot of that stuff. So that song was really about the idea of kind of losing your sense of that kind of small thinking patriotism kind of thing, that and becoming and looking to a larger thing, that people are people everywhere, and really that old cliche, but it's a true cliche, that rock and roll is kind of a unifying influence all over the world. It really is the one thing that everybody, you can relate through no matter what country you're in. So what we did is we disguised it kind of with the use of double entendre and all that kind of thing, and allusion to a love song. The idea that, you know, do I want to stay with you, or expatriate, or do we want to live in the United States, that kind of thing. But it really is an analogy and a symbol for a much larger thing than that. And things like the hostages and all that stuff, that's just all part of what's going on in the world, and another way of looking at things.
On your world tour, one of the stops you made, I know, was Australia.
Right.
And one of the things I do for the magazine is I write a gossip column called Hot Flashes.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the item from RCA Publicity about that you guys were heroes down under, that you apprehended bank robbers.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a bank robber. It was a restaurant robber. Yeah. After hours, we kept the restaurant open. Or they kept one open for us because we played a gig and it was real late. And it was a pretty posh restaurant, and in Melbourne, Australia. And we went in, and there was nobody there but us. When I say us, it was my road manager, our bass player John, me, and our bass player's girlfriend. And there was two other couples sitting across the room who I think was the brother. One of them was the brother of the owner or something like that. And anyway, so we're eating. We finished up our food, and we were having coffee. And this guy ran in with a ski mask and a sawed-off shotgun, and started waving it around our faces and told us to get on the floor, which we didn't do for some weird reason. And I just couldn't believe it, actually. I just thought it was...
God, we're back in New York.
Yeah, you know, it didn't seem right. There was something wrong. And so it just wasn't happening for the guy. You know, he didn't have control of it. And after various things that went down, somebody grabbed the end of his gun, and everybody jumped on him, and he ran straight through a plate glass window. And we ran out after him and disarmed him and held him for the cops. And when they came, they told us that he was one of the most wanted criminals in Australia. And they call him the Rusty Gun Bandit. And they've been looking for him for 2 years because the guy had done something like 20 or 30 of these restaurant robberies. And so we were heroes because we captured the guy.
Was this the beginning of the tour or the end of the
tour? It was right at the beginning of the Australian tour. It was the end of the world tour.
Oh, good note to end it on.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was, in fact, it was the last country before we came back.
I want to get back to a song on the album, Got a Lot of Nerve.
Mm-hmm.
I sense a Carly Simon revenge attitude on it, like, you know.
I was in a nasty mood when actually Janna Allen wrote a lot of lyrics on that, so you can blame her for that one. I guess she's a revengeful, spiteful creature.
When did you first latch up with her?
Oh, years ago. We've been living, writing, and various other things together for years and years.
Is she Sarah of
Sarah? Yeah, she is the Sarah.
She used to be a stewardess?
That's when I first met her. Years and years. That was only for a little while. That was when she first got out of school.
That's interesting, because John's song is Sarah Turner, right?
Yeah, that was when we both met her at the same time, and he wrote that about her, and subsequently I started hooking up with her.
There's this other song which is my favorite on the album, Kiss on My List.
Yeah.
It's a fun song.
Yeah.
It's such a silly love song, like a Paul McCartney arrangement.
Yeah, right.
But on the other hand, you know, I was looking at the lyrics today, and at the end, but I may be lying.
That's called a modern love song. That's saying your kiss is on my list of the best things. You're not the only one. There's other ones I like equally. I wrote that with Sandy's sister, with Sarah's sister, Janna, who is a budding young songwriter now. And I gave her first guitar and taught her how to play and all this, and now she's come up with some unbelievable songs. So that was one of the first ones that we wrote together, and I think there's going to be some more.
Well, you've been in New York a while. You've been on around. Is there anything that you get into the New York music scene? I know, of course, Robert lives in Manhattan, or did.
He's in and out.
He's in and out. Do you get into you or John get into the New York music scene a deeper level than one might notice?
We go in phases with it. Right now, I'm not too involved because I'm too busy. I haven't been home that much. I've been home for about a month now, and in that month I've been pretty much reclusive, sitting around trying to write for the new album, which we're starting on Monday. So I haven't really been out too much, but probably what will happen is, since I'll be working so much in the studio, I'll probably go out at night and start hanging out again. But I've been kind of out of the scene for a while because we've been on the road for a year and a half. And like I said, we've only been home for a month.
Where did you hang out?
Where did I? Oh, no one place. Depends on who's playing where, you know. I don't have any, I'm not a hanger out person, you know. I hang out with friends. I don't hang out at clubs too much. Sometimes, like I say, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends. I go through phases.
Let's get into the new album. You start to work in on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
What's your anticipations right now?
So far I see the writing, and I'm sure the production will be very similar to the Voices album. I mean, it's going to be, it's an extension of that because we're using the same elements. We're producing it. We're doing it in the same studio. We're using the same band, basically. So all those things would lead me to believe that it's going to come out the same way.
This is Electric Ladyland?
Yeah, we're going to do it Electric Lady.
Can you drop any hints as to either titles or plots?
Well, it's really too early because, I don't know. The way we write, we don't really finish lyrics until we do the rhythm tracks. So I don't even have any titles, positive titles to give you, you know. I mean, we have working titles, but we change lyrics all the time. So it's until we actually get about halfway into the album, it's hard even to say what songs are going to be on it, you know. So I couldn't even project what's going to be on it.
How do you and John remain as tight as you apparently do over the years? You know, you've had so many people that, you know, Sonny and Cher, and, who eventually something happens and they just get sick of one another.
Well, I don't know. I think it's a complementary relationship. There's a lot of mutual respect. We have our own areas that we work in. He takes care of certain things. I take care of other things. That evolves out of our natural interests and things like that. We just don't get in each other's way.
Can you give me, for instance, in other words, John is apt to do this when I'm apt to do that?
John takes care of a lot of the visual things. He has complete charge of when we do videos and things like that. That end of what it is that we do, you know, that stuff. Whereas I take charge of the actual musical stuff. I do all the arranging and all the vocal arranging, the instrumental arranging, things like that, and actually adapt his songs. I mean, even when he has a song, I'll usually take the song and actually arrange it. So I deal with the real hardcore musical end, and he deals with some of the other things. Like that would be a perfect example. He deals with a video, which I have. He's much more of a technically oriented person than I am. He knows how to twist dials and things like that, where I go for the emotional end more.
Do you do anything together while you're not in the studio, when you're not recording? Let's say while you're on tour, you get a breather, you get a day.
No. When we don't have to be together, we don't stay together. We go the opposite direction because we have to be together so much that whenever we get a chance, we go our separate ways. I mean, we're friends, but at this point, our business causes us to be friendlier than even a friend is. You know what I mean? It's like, I wouldn't even want to see my best friend as often as I see John Oates. So it's, when we can, we get away.
Well, what will you do in your spare time?
I don't know. I travel for pleasure as opposed to traveling for work. That's something different itself. I do a lot of that. I read a lot, things like that. I don't have any, I'm not a very, I don't like to go skiing and stuff like that, whereas John does those kind of things. I don't have any particular thing. I like to go and follow up some things that I read. Maybe I'll go to England or Italy or somewhere and follow up a certain thing that I've been reading about, you know, and I'll go see some place that I just read about or something like that.
John, would you say is more apt to physical adventure?
Yeah, he likes to go to different races, things like that. He's very much of a racing buff, so he does that, and he goes skiing. You know, he's more of a jock than I am. I never was much of a jock.
You're an aesthetic.
Yeah.
Well, I believe you mentioned that by doing your solo album, Sacred Songs, it allowed you to get some unbridled creativity out into the open, and it made it easier to go back to the studio and face things.
Yeah, that's the thing. See, my solo stuff I tend to look at as being apart from this kind of schedule pressure and actually any kind of pressure. So I just do what I feel like doing. There's no limits to it and no expectations on it. So I can do whatever I want with that. So in fact, I think I'm going to do another one this year sometime. So I have to start thinking about what I want to do. But I do kind of keep that outside of everything.
So I think by touring a lot, you become more optimistic in your music? Certainly, She's Gone seems to be pretty sad, and Sarah Smile. And then you get something like number 1, which I wouldn't call it happy, but it seems to be, you seem to have more energy. You seem to have okay, the past is there, the emotion is downplayed a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I find that I don't write very many sad songs anymore. There's a number of reasons. One, because I don't feel sad, and 2, because I have a thing about it. I think it's too easy to write a sad song. It's a challenge for me. Every artist, always the old story is they always function more productively under duress and kind of this, angst and feelings of depression. It's always easier to write a sad, down song than it is to deal with a down emotion than it is to deal with an up one. And so I kind of have an ongoing challenge to myself to try and find an artistic emotion in a more joyous sense than just that old feeling sorry for yourself or down in the dumps sense, which it's much easier to write under.
Well, I think for that one song, Diddy Doo Wop,
yeah.
I love it. It's such a throwback on the one hand. The album Voices, you have a lot of vocal playing there with the doo-wop music, and it's, look at me, I'm running, oh, what have I done? It's like, hey, it's all right, look what I did.
Yeah.
You think you may want to do more of that doo-wop sort of sound or experiment with your voice more?
Maybe. I don't know. I like doing, that's really both of our roots, street corner music, so that's something that I think we might play around with a little more.
Do you think 20 years ago we could have gone down somewhere and found you on the street corner in Philadelphia?
Yeah, you would have found me.
Did you see yourself? I don't recall whether you were ever. I think you were at the Coliseum once.
Yeah, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Didn't like it, I think.
I don't like big places. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I prefer playing, especially around here. I like playing smaller places. But so, it depends. There's good and bad points about large places and small.
What was the name of the high school that won that bubblegum contest?
I don't remember. You mean the one around you? I don't know. It was out in Hempstead, not Hempstead. It was in the Hamptons somewhere.
Who thought up that idea?
So they came to us. They asked us if we wanted to do a national high school tour, just to play in high schools as a prize to the Carefree people, and we jumped at it because it was great. It was a decent amount of money, and they it gave us a chance to play in places we never would go to. It was such a weird experience, and when you're touring, you're always looking for some strange thing to break up the monotony of touring. It was one of the best tours I ever did.
Did it ever bring to mind maybe high school days when you wish there was a band that would have come around and you could have...
Yeah, these kids were so freaked out that they had that a real rock and roll band was playing in their school as opposed to just the locals, that they just went nuts. It was and kids were asking us all these questions. They never get a chance to ask. When you're a teenager, you don't get a chance to come up to somebody like me and ask them various questions about my life and how they could do it and where they should go and all that kind of stuff.
If you were back in high school right now, Daryl, I guess you went to school in the 50s, 60s.
In the 60s.
In the 60s. Who would you have wanted to see in your high school gym?
In those days?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Probably somebody like James Brown or somebody like that.
Terrific. All right, well, this will be out in about a month or so.
Okay.
And I know you'll get a copy of it, and maybe I'll be catching you somewhere along the line. I do appreciate speaking to you.
Okay, Bruce.
And
all right.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Bruce Fredericks. Welcome to another in a series of interviews I conducted with rock musicians back in the 70s and 80s, while a journalist for the Island Ear, an entertainment magazine of Long Island and Queens. This time, I'm very pleased to bring you part 2 of my 2-part interview with famed pop duo Hall Oates. It took place in the winter of 1981, between the release of the group's 11th LP, Voices, which remains perhaps the most popular Hall & Oates album of all time, and as the group was about to enter the studio to record their follow-up hit album, Private Eyes, which is referred to on this podcast by its working title at the time, Head Above Water. Part 2 covers my chat with John Oates. During our chat, John spoke about his collaboration with Daryl Hall, the duo's philosophies and techniques surrounding Private Eyes, and recording music in general, what John likes to do when not in the studio or on tour, and more. Here now, my conversation with John Oates.
Yeah, we're about 3/4 of the way finished.
Very good. Where are you working this time?
Electric Lady's entire project is there.
Yeah, that's where you worked the last time.
We split it up last time. Last time was half at the Hit Factory. We cut the tracks at the Hit Factory and did some, very basic overdubs, and then we finished the album at Electric Lady. But this time we're doing the entire album there.
Very good. And again, it's self-produced.
Yeah, it's self-produced. However, it's also co-produced this time with our engineer who worked on the last album. We felt that he contributed so much to what we had done last time that we felt it was it was worth the credit and the co-production.
Can you give me his name?
Neil Kernon.
Kernon. Can you spell that?
K-I-R-E-N.
K-I-R-E-N. And who else has he worked with?
Oh, a lot of people, everyone. He's worked with Yes, Led Zeppelin, Genesis. I mean, he was a staff engineer in England, I think at Trident for many years. So he's really he produced the last Orleans album, I believe.
What exactly does he add? What type of flavor? What type of, is he bold? Is he?
Well, no, it's not that. It's more of the fact that Daryl and I, on the last album, we made a big step in terms of taking the responsibility to produce it ourselves. We felt confident in our musical ability and in general just keeping the project together enough to do that. However, neither of us are real technically oriented people. We like to concentrate on performances, on the conceptualization of the music, rather than the actual nitty-gritty of the mechanics of it. And when Neil came into the project halfway through, we started with a staff engineer at the Hit Factory, and we felt that we needed some unusual sounds and we needed some extra input from the technical side. So upon recommendation from some other people, we brought Neil in halfway through the project, and he came up with great technical ideas that complemented the musical ideas that we'd already laid down. And in addition to that, he's always been a fan of our music, and he had an intimate knowledge of our past music, so he understood inherently where we were going. And it didn't, in other words, the idea of self-production to him seemed like the next logical step, as it did to us. So it just seemed to mesh very well. On this project, he's so totally in control of the technical end that it leaves Daryl and I pretty free to be as musical as we want and not even have the slightest worry or concern about whether that other end is being held down. And in addition to that, he's also a very good musician, and he contributes musical ideas.
All right, see, what does he play?
He plays a little guitar, he plays a little piano. He's just a general overall. In other words, he's musical enough so that if we're in the studio singing, he can help us. He can say, okay, the pitch is not right, or you got to lay back a little bit rhythmically. He can communicate to us in musical terms, not as most engineers. They don't really understand music enough. So he really he fills a very important gap, and we felt that it was important enough to include him on this project in that capacity.
Well, the next logical question is, can you explain some of the new twists on this album in terms of instrumentation, vocalization, rhythmic patterns, etc.?
Well, I would say that it's an extension of the last album. However, the main difference between the last album and this album is that the last album sort of had a general feeling of going back to the roots to step ahead. On some of the songs like Diddy Doo Wop, Africa, well, of course, You Lost That Love and Feeling, which was an oldie anyway. We sort of relied on 60s conventions, a lot of doo-wop style harmony, a lot of those sort of looking back but yet looking forward kind of things. And we're not doing that on this album. We've abandoned the looking back in terms of like doo-wop harmonies or anything that smacks of 60s style conventions. We totally went away from that, and it's a little more progressive, but the similarities are the fact that it's still band-oriented. The same group of musicians are used on the album, which gives the album generally the same kind of sound that the last album had. And I think our vocal style on this album, I think it's a little less Hall Oates, traditional Hall Oates. There's not as many two-part harmonies, and it's just a little bit different. It's really hard to say because we're in the middle of the project now. I haven't had a chance to step back and observe it, You can't really tell what something's going to be until it's over and done and you step back and...
That's an interesting point, because right now you're immersed in it.
Exactly.
And you don't know exactly how it's going to come out.
No,
it's a painter paints a painting.
Exactly. This is the feeling I'm getting as I'm doing it, but in retrospect, when it's done, I may listen to it and say, oh, yeah, this, I may be totally wrong, so I shouldn't actually commit myself to any of these descriptions.
So what you're, at this point in the recording, though you're 3/4 of the way through, you may very well step back at the end and say, look, this just isn't exactly what we're looking for, I don't think it's right, let's go back and remix?
Yes. In addition to just remixing, we may step back, and we've left ourselves a few weeks leeway in terms of the release date, and we may actually go say, well, you know, this album needs a ballad, or this album needs something more up song to fill out the second side. You know, we may actually find that. We may go in and cut a brand new song, or who knows? We may sort of do anything that's required to make the album seem right. So we're totally leaving it open. In other words, we have a group of songs now. We have 12 songs, which is perfect in terms of filling out the album. We may cut one, we may add one, do a cover version, which I doubt, but we may. We're totally open to anything. Whatever the album requires to complete the picture, we will then do.
John, all the songs that are on this album, you are writing at the present time, or are some of these some things that have been sort of in the bag?
No, they're all new.
Our
songs are always new. We seldom do anything that we have left over. It always seems that even though many times we have good material left over that doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the material, it seems that by the next project we've written so many more songs and they seem more immediate and more vital that the songs we have in the can, they don't mean that much. So we tend to never do older material. So this is all new material.
Do you feel, going back to schedules for a minute, you seem to be, well, most groups must be haunted by that schedule. RCA says, hey, we got this thing rolling. We want that out just about, let's say, June, which is what I understand. Pretty haunting, huh?
Yeah, I'm not particularly happy with meeting those kind of deadlines. I don't work well that way. I take a little... Personally, I tend to take a little longer to write, and I like to have that period of time to... I do a lot of rewriting. I'm very spontaneous, but yet I do a lot of reworking of my personal material. Daryl's more prolific than me, and he also works a little more spontaneously. So I don't think it bothers him quite as much, but me personally, I don't care for these ever-tightening deadlines. So, but it's a fact of life, something that I have to live with, so I hang with it.
Just returning to the musicians for a minute, I'm going to get back to that idea of arranging and everything in a little while. Are there any additional musicians on this album that were not present on the last album that we should look for?
Only one, and he's only played on one song. We used a new drummer named Mickey Curry on one track. We just wanted to try him. We heard he was good, and he was also friends with our guitar player, G.E., and we wanted to try him, and he worked out very well. And we used, most of the drums were done by Jerry Marotta, as were on the last album. Chuck Berge as well did some drumming, who plays with us on the road. Jerry Marotta did the majority of the drumming. And Chuck Berge, who also works with us on the road, and one track was done by Mickey Curry. And the bass was played by John Siegler, who's been with us for a while. G.E. played most of the guitars, along with myself. G.E. Smith. And basically that's the rhythm section. And Charlie Deschamps, of course, on saxophone.
Yeah, he's great.
And we may use Jeff Southworth on guitar on one or two songs.
How about Sarah Allen and Janna Allen? What's their contribution to that?
Well, Sarah has again written lyrics with us, and we're still in the process of finishing up some of the lyrics, so she's made quite a strong contribution to this album in terms of lyrics. Janna, so far, I don't think she's done anything, because Daryl normally works with her. I don't work with her. So
Janna is the sister?
Is the younger sister, right.
The younger sister.
I think she may have written one of the songs. She may have worked Daryl on, but I don't really know, because I don't think about credits until I have to.
Yeah, you're the one who discovered Sarah way back when she was a stewardess?
Well, I didn't discover her. I happened to meet her first, and Daryl and her finally got together.
Does Sarah live with Daryl?
Yeah, they've been together a long time.
And Sarah smile and Sarah turn around.
Right. And on and on. Yeah.
And on and on. It's good material.
Yeah.
How would you characterize yourself in comparison to Daryl? I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot, and I'm sure as time goes on you have some interesting new thoughts about the question.
I think what we do is basically we meet on a musical ground in terms of similarities. That seems to be where we come together. We both seem to react to what's musically right and wrong the same way. We seem to inherently know what's right and wrong for each other as well as within ourselves. By that I mean, if one of us plays something, if one of us goes, God, I hate that part, usually the other one will turn around and go, you're right, I hate it too. It's that kind of thing.
in terms of our musical differences, I think that just has to do with, God, I don't know, it's so hard to talk about this. I mean, I know what it is, but it's so hard to articulate it.
Probably somebody who looks at the both of you every day would have an easier time.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's so hard. I mean, we're both, you can't make sort of blanket statements about, okay, I'm extroverted, he's introverted, or vice versa. It doesn't work that way. Daryl is much more prolific than me. He probably writes 4 or 5 songs to every one of mine. So therefore, that's where you get that balance, and that tends to manifest itself on stage. And Daryl he's good on stage. He's a very striking figure. Alone, in addition to his talents, tends to be a very strong focal point.
Okay. I also noticed that I was talking to Daryl before, that you're into skiing and racing and sports, and he's more into reading and traveling and things like that. Could you elaborate on that?
I would say that in terms of outside of our music, that's true. I like to I enjoy getting out and doing things, moving my body. I use outside recreational things it sort of like erases my mind. It takes music completely out of my mind. I especially like motor racing. I used to race Formula Fords and do some kart racing. And for me, it was like such an environment and such a situation that was outside of music. The people involved. It was sort of I won't say it was non-creative, but it was definitely not creative from sort of an artistic point of view. And it wasn't that artistic environment where you have people. There's a mentality among artistic people and creative people when they get together, and there's another mentality among people who do other things, say tennis players, or not that it's not a creative endeavor, but it's different. And by being around different kinds of people, since my life generally centers around a very small group of people who think basically the same way, it's sort of like a very refreshing sort of a break from my routine, and it just makes me feel good. And then when I come back to music, I feel much more refreshed about it and much more stimulated to get back into my musical routine. So I like to use those things. It's almost like therapy to me.
Yeah, it helps you unwind a bit, huh?
Right, exactly.
Where do you ski? Where do you like to ski?
Oh, I've skied all over the world. I've been all over the world. Yeah. I skied the Alps, and I skied in Austria, and I skied in Colorado, and skied in Vermont, and all the places you're supposed to go. I've been there.
You like a competitive edge?
I'm not a great skier, but I've been skiing for a long time, so I can enjoy myself.
And you try to take some time off during your tour.
Well, I can't do that. No, that never happens. That's always a dream, but it never happens. First of all, you're moving too fast and working too hard and traveling too often, and you're trying to conserve your strength for performances and for the schedule that's imposed on you, like interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't have a chance to do that. When I have a day off on a tour, I'm sleeping, basically. It's really in between tours, in between recordings, things like that, weekends, where I can get a chance to get away.
I know one thing both of you share is your feelings about Philadelphia.
Well, I don't know about that. Daryl's a little more vehement about his feelings. I don't know about I just see it as my old hometown, a place where I grew up and I learned a lot of things, where a lot of my friends have moved away from, a place that I don't quite relate to as home as much as I used to. If my parents still didn't live there, I doubt whether I would go there very often at all. And I don't feel bad about it. I think it was a good learning experience. I think the way we have spoken about Philadelphia in the past had a lot to do with just a reaction to people constantly harping on it and constantly labeling us as the Philly sound, as this and as that. It was sort of a one-dimensional label that really, if you listen to our music, you can see that it's only one part of our music. And I think that those labels and that insistence upon that caused us to react perhaps negatively a little more strongly than we would have had that label not been imposed on us.
The Philadelphia label.
Right. I mean, I see nothing wrong with it. I mean, there's been a lot of great artists that come out of Philadelphia. I mean, Eddie Fisher,
yeah.
Chubby Checker. No.
Well, isn't that James Brown territory?
Well, no, there's been, in terms of contemporary musicians, I guess it's just Todd and us. But in the past,
Daryl said it was the biggest small city.
It's one of them, It's one of them. I'll agree with that.
The two of you work together. You don't play together, and I'm sure that's for a very good reason.
Right. Well, Daryl and I spend, out of a year's time, I would say we spend about 90% of our year together, whether it be writing together, whether it be recording, working. I mean, I spend more time with him than I spend with anybody. So, you know, you have to get away.
John, are you married right now?
No, I've been living with a girl for about 2.5 years now. He has a career as well, so she understands, and her time is well used, and she has enough time to devote to what she has to do. So that's good.
You know, in relationships, I think when the two don't have enough to do, that's when you run into problems.
Right, or if one has a lot to do and the other one depends on that person for their life, that's usually where it goes wrong, I found in my experience.
Yeah, all right. I want to return to the beginning section just for 1 second. Working title of the record, do you have one?
Head Above Water.
Head Above Water. Any significance, reason?
It's so hard to keep your head above water. That is the story.
And that will be a title track.
It is a song as well, and it has to do with deadlines. It has to do with moving fast, changing musical world, and you know, within your life and within the world as it is. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Life in the fast lane.
Well, not even the fast lane. Sometimes the slow lane.
Any other song titles?
Let me see. Friday Let Me Down Tonight.
Can you say who wrote these as you go along?
Well, yeah, I mean, most of the songs are collaborations this time. There's very few that were written by, I think Daryl wrote one song by himself, A Big Girl Now, You're a Big Girl Now. We collaborated on lyrics on almost every song, so most of the songs are co-written. Did It in a Minute, Gotta Be Your Own Boss, Baby. What's the other song I was just writing? Don't Go Out on the Street, a little contemporary Paranoia song. There's a few. I mean, there's 12 songs. I can't think of them all right now. But
who's more of the arranger?
Well, like I said before, it goes back to that old balance between who writes the songs. If Daryl basically writes the music to a song, he usually has a very definite idea of how he wants it to sound, and therefore he basically takes over that production, that specific song. Whereas the songs I write, I usually have the idea, and I take over that production. I dictate the general feeling of the song, the kind of instrumentation I would like to hear, the basic arrangement, and then, of course, then everyone begins to add their input. You know, the musicians add their particular or peculiar style to that song. The band itself may be playing it down and say, oh, you know, we should go to the chorus here instead of another verse, or something like that. You know, all those finer points are then left open for interpretation and for change.
Well, I don't think you're distinct enough that somebody in the audience can say that is a John Oates song.
No.
Because that's I think an advantage. You got such a great identity.
Well, that's I don't know. You know, that I don't know what people. I always assume that people understand less than they do. Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised about people's perception about our music and about how much they do relate and understand. So I don't really know. It's hard for me to say that. But in terms of general statements about it, it's usually the arrangements, they start from Daryl or myself will have a very definite idea about what it should be, and then along the way it changes and evolves and becomes part of the whole. You know, various songs tend to become more similar to the other songs on the album for coherence and consistency and things like that. If we get into a style of guitar playing or a certain sound on an amp or an instrument that we like, we may try to use that sound again on another song just for coherence and that. So everything evolves. You know, it starts as one thing and becomes something else.
Working on some videos, huh? Yeah, I hear you're a master of the video.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think that we've used video only as a promotional tool so far. I would like to do something that was a project. I would do a video project from the ground up, something that started as conceived to be a visual project with music. It would have to be conceived that way and approached that way. I think what we've done in the past and what we probably will do for the near future anyway, because of our time limitations and what we're really directing our energy towards is basically use video as a promotion for our records. And that's not always a totally artistic endeavor. There's a lot of other considerations. So, you know, on the last album, we hired an outside company to do it. We did a very straightforward video, basically a performance. We didn't try anything too, we weren't stretching the boundaries of create a video in any way. And a lot of that had to do with time limitations and other things. So on the ecstatic video, for instance, I did most of the conceptualizing and a lot of the production work with another guy on that. And that was a little more adventurous. It depends on the situation. On this album, I have a feeling we're going to be very much pressed for time. We may again just do a basic promotion video.
This time thing is something, there's some groups who go around, Fleetwood Mac is one of them, Stevie Wonder is one of them, and they take their sweet time. They go to Africa for 3 years. Now, Hall Oates always seems to be, we got to bang out this album, we got to meet this schedule.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a very, very interesting... It's true. I am not necessarily happy with that situation. It seems that we work really hard. I enjoy working hard, but I don't necessarily enjoy producing and writing at that pace. But there always seems to be, if the album doesn't come out now or then you can't do that in the fall, or if it doesn't come out by May 15th, then the tour that we had planned for June 14th has to be pushed back to August. This sort of chain reaction of events, and I think we just, I don't know, we seem to run at the edge all the time.
A master plan. I related to Robert Fripp and his drive toward 1981.
I don't know exactly why this has happened, but it's happened, and it keeps happening. I don't understand it either. I see Bruce Springsteen takes 2 years to make his album. We take 6 weeks to make ours. I don't know.
Well, some people work better under the given...
I guess so. Maybe if I had all the time I wanted, maybe I'd be so lazy and I still wouldn't write any more songs. You never know.
It might be the way the audience makes it up to be. I've got a steady popularity, and you certainly proved that on the last album and the ones before that. But Springsteen is God.
Well, it's a different. I don't know. It's a different way of working. It's a different way of it's a totally different thing. I don't compare or relate our careers with his at all. In terms of he did it a totally different way. We've done it in a very, very step by step, sort of one boulder at a time, climbing the mountain. Whereas Bruce did it in a entirely different way. So I think our method and our way of working, I think, contributes to longevity in one way or another. We've never sort of exploded totally, yet we've never been out of the picture either. And I kind of like that feeling. I enjoy being there.
It's knowing what's happening tomorrow.
Yeah, I know that in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, I'll still be able to make records, regardless of what happens, because of the base that we've built with our FM audiences and our FM radio, and with our fairly constant touring for almost 8 years now.
They say if you stay away for too long, they may not want you back.
Well, people change. Kids change. The record audience changes. The concert audience changes.
You miss that key age.
It all changes. I mean, I think that what we've done, the kind of groundwork we've laid and built for ourselves, will enable Daryl and I together, or Daryl and I separately, or whatever configuration happens, to continue to be creative and have an audience of some sort. I don't know how big. That of course changes, but I think it's a very secure feeling in knowing that we've laid that solid groundwork. I would like to do a solo album, but like I said before, a lot of it has to do with material. Right now, the material that I write, since I don't write that much, tend to have all the creative outlet I need within the framework of Hall Oates. If it came to the point where I had an overabundance of songs that I couldn't use with Hall Oates because they were different style songs or because there were just too many, then that would be the reason to pursue a solo project in order to vent my creative output. As long as it stays the way it is, then I'm fairly satisfied with doing it within this framework.
If you were to do your own solo album, what would you do that you're not doing here?
Well, I'll tell you what I would do first. First of all, if I was to do a solo album under ideal circumstances, I would get away from music for a while. I would definitely take 6 months or so off, maybe a year. And I would totally get away from music and write in a totally different, without the pressure of having to produce, and see what happens. And then I would also like to experiment with totally different musicians. Not that I don't like playing with the guys that we play with, because I think that they're the best, or we wouldn't be using them. But I would just, as an experiment, I would just totally like to step totally outside of anything that Hall Oates has done, just as a breath of fresh air, and to see what would happen. And also, I'd like to come up with a concept for a solo project rather than just do a collection of songs, sort of a random collection of songs. To me, that's not very stimulating. I would have to step back to see what would happen first. That would be the ideal circumstance.
Sounds like a wise move.
Mm-hmm.
Any projects that we should know about that we don't already?
I'm immersed in this project. This will be our new album. We'll be touring all over the world behind it. And for the next year or so, this is the project. So I don't see anything else. We'll be doing a lot more TV, I assume. We've had a lot of good reaction to our TV exposure. That we've done a lot of TV this past year, more than we've ever done before. And we've had very good reaction to that. So I assume that we'll be doing more of that.
How about the tour?
The tour. Well, it's really up in the air right now. We're going to do a short college tour in April and May. It's going to be basically from the old show, the last show, because the colleges are still. I'm already a year ahead of the people who buy records. We have to do the old show because, well, that's what they bought basically. So we'll do the old show in April, and then in May and June we're going to prepare for the new show with the new album.
So there won't be any new songs in the old show.
We may do one or two, but probably not.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, the people who come to see you feel more comfortable, I think, if they can sing along.
Well, I mean, after basically 3 hits from this album, and maybe 4.
The album, they won't have any point of reference yet. They'll hear the songs, which will be nice to taste. But once that album comes out is when you can...
No, they'll hear You Lost That Love and Feeling, Kiss on My List, and How Does It Feel, and all the songs that they want to hear.
Well, I think it's great. I love your music, and I'm really glad I had a chance to talk to both you and Daryl.
All right.
And I can't wait to see you again.
Okay, great.
Hey, good luck in the studio on the rest of your album.
All right.
And I'll be seeing you soon.
Okay, nice talking to you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.